Alexander the Great is a very interesting figure, obviously, historically, and in relation to the rabbis as well. Two very interesting things just that come up in Jewish tradition. One, we see that one of the names that people actually give their children is Alexander. One of the names that people name a child, which some of us maybe went to the bris today. It was a beautiful naming of the baby. So there was a tradition that developed to actually name after Alexander the Great, which is very curious. I don't know if there's any other example we have of a name that actually comes from a non-Jewish person, right? Even by modern day, in the Hasidic community, you'll find people named Sender, short for Alexander. So we see there's this minhag, this is a custom to actually name after Alexander. It comes from Alexander the Great. It's a little bit shocking. The second, there's a day we actually observe. Again, I don't know if it's brought down the halacha. I didn't get so much of a chance to look into it. But the Gemara, the Talmud, discusses it. The 25th of Tevet. It's actually the 25th of Tevet we actually just passed by. We're holding in the beginning of the month of Shvat. We just passed the 25th of Tevet. And the rabbis discussed the 25th of Tevet was actually considered a very happy day. We don't have fasts on that day. And the reason has to do actually with Alexander the Great. So we've named children after Alexander the Great, and we have a whole day that actually is a day of sort of expressing gratitude for an event involving Alexander the Great. And it's a very curious thing. We don't really see this by very many non-Jewish leaders, that we have such a express such an amount of gratitude to them. So we're going to explore tonight what was the event that happened involving Alexander the Great. Why are we so thankful to him? And how, perhaps Jewish tradition as a whole, how we relate to the great emperor, conqueror, Alexander the Great, one of the mightiest generals, leaders of all time. So let's get started. Maybe just a little bit of historical background. It could be some of you, some of the audience that already know more about Alexander the Great than I do, but in my research, some of the interesting things come up. So in the Talmud, he's actually known as Alexander HaMacedon, Alexander of Macedonia. It's interesting. He wasn't actually originally from Greece. He was from Macedonia, which is an area in northwest Greece, Albania, somewhere in that area of the world. And interestingly enough, his father was really the first to sort of make his entrance into world domination. His father was named Philip, King Philip of Macedonia, and he began conquering some of these Greek city-states. Maybe, again, I don't know for certain, but, Sparta and all these types of places, that's sort of what comes to my mind. I don't know if I'm historically correct in saying that, but it's what I sort of think about in my head. So he conquered a lot of these city-states, and he had a son named Alexander, who he educated with the best money could buy. In fact, Alexander's tutor was none other than Aristotle. Aristotle was the teacher of Alexander the Great. Very interesting fact. Now, I don't think that Aristotle did a very good job of teaching Alexander the Great ethics, or maybe he did so, but in a very theoretical way, because lo and behold, how did Alexander the Great gain his ascendancy to the throne? He murdered his father. That was how. So that was how Alexander the Great became the ruler in his father's stead. He murdered his father. That was when Alexander was 20 years of age. And he took up his father's tradition of world domination, trying to conquer the rest of the world, he made his way east, sort of towards the, Turkey, modern day Israel, and, sort of into that part of the world. Now, one of his very great enemies, Alexander the Great, was actually the Persian Empire. Persian Empire was sort of in control prior to Alexander the Great entrance into history. And it came out that Alexander the Great's main enemy was the Persians. And in order to fight this war against the Persians, he had to gain the support of the various peoples that he would conquer. And as he went by different countries, many of those countries would end up giving their support to Alexander the Great. And some nations were able to use their support for his wars as a way of sort of gaining favor with the emperor, and maybe with the assumption that he would do favors for them afterwards. And then that's what happened. So interestingly enough, the Kuthians, the Kutim, who we're going to talk about in a moment, were one of the great supporters of Alexander the Great, and they helped him win the war when he had a battle for one of the cities in Lebanon, Tyre. They lent their support for his battle. He laid a siege against this city where the Persians were in control. Interestingly enough, the Jewish people, the Jews in Judea, in Israel, were not supportive of Alexander the Great. The reason was not necessarily ideological, but it was because of a pact or a sort of an oath that they made to the Persians. I don't know so much about this, but this is what I was reading. And they made an oath to Persians that they wouldn't join up against them. So they weren't one of the peoples that ended up helping Alexander the Great, which we'll see in a little bit, came a little bit back to stab them. But thank God everything was okay in the end. We're going to see. Okay, so like I said, the Kutim, the Kuthians, were one of the people that helped Alexander the Great in his conquest against the Persians. So I think it'll be time maybe we can speak a little bit about the Kuthians. They're very interesting people. They come up at first at the end of, really in the middle of Malachim base. That's Kings 2, the second Kings, Sefer of Kings, where they're discussed as a people that converted to Judaism. It was said that they were people living around the area of Israel. And they went through a lot of tragedies, lion attacks, and different things like that. And they thought, oh, there's something going on here. We need to figure out what. And they sent messages actually to the 10 tribes, northern Israel, who came and taught them about Judaism. And they decided to convert to Judaism. These were the Kuthians. Now, one of the great discussions in Jewish law is exactly what is the status of the Kuthians. Because their conversion was assumed to not be legitimate and with good intentions. Why? Because they didn't accept anything beyond the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses. They said, we accept the 5 books of Moses, but we don't accept the rest of it. And we also don't accept the authority of the sages. We don't accept the rabbinic law. We don't accept the oral Torah. So the Kuthians were considered, it was debated, are they considered Jews? Are they considered not Jews? That was one of the debates that comes up in the Talmud, in the Sechet Kedushin, Tractate of Kedushin, which discusses lineage and different things like that. So in the times of the Second Temple, which is when our story is going to take place, the Ezra helped lead the Jewish people back from exile. And one of the major decrees of Ezra when bringing the Jewish people back to Israel actually had to do with the Kuthians, the Kutim. And he made it forbidden to marry the Kutim. You were not allowed to. And the Kutim, out of frustration, they realized, okay, the Jewish people are not accepting of us anymore. So they went off on their own, established basically their own religion, built their own temple on Har HaGrizim, Mount Grizim, and became a thorn in the side of the Jewish people. They did whatever they could to make life miserable for the Jewish people. One of their tactics, of course, was to go to whoever was in power, the government at the time, and to inform against the Jews and to try to win favor with those rulers. So, of course, when Alexander the Great had a meteoric rise to power, the Kuthians were very excited to help and thereby gain his favor so that they could use their influence against the Jewish people. So that was the goal of the Kuthians. So just back to a little more historical context, and then we're going to get into the Maisa, the story that I wanted to share with everybody. So, again, Alexander the Great, he conquered Egypt, and one of his goals with the spread of Greek culture, Hellenism, was to unite all the people, to bring people into one common culture. And he realized that one of the major roadblocks to that was the very many world religions that existed. Everyone had their own temples, their own belief systems. So he really wanted to bring everyone underneath the umbrella of Hellenism. However, on his way towards conquering India, I think he got to the Indus Valley, it came out that all of his soldiers, he had to have hundreds of thousands of soldiers. They'd been at war for many years already, and they decided, we don't really want to do this much longer. We miss our families, our wives, our kids. Let's go home already. So Alexander said, okay, fine. What can I do? If I don't have an army, I can't really conquer very many more territories. So he said, okay. And he ended up dying at the young age of 33. And I think he split his kingdom into 3 different parts. And that is the story of, at least the history behind Alexander the Great. Now we're going to go and we're going to discuss the political intrigue, this battle between the Kutim and the Jewish people. We're going to see it is a very interesting story. So the Gemara, the Talmud I'm going to share with everyone is in Tractate Yoma dealing with the laws of Yom Kippur. So there in that Gemara, it discusses an interesting halachic debate. It says that a Kohen, a priest, is forbidden to go out while wearing the priestly garments, meaning he's not allowed to leave the temple while wearing his priestly garments. However, when he's in the temple, when he's in the Beis HaMikdash, he is allowed to wear his priestly garments even while not doing the service, not performing the service. Meaning he could sort of sit around in the temple. As long as he's in the temple, he can wear his priestly garments. But once he leaves, he's not allowed to be wearing his priestly garments anymore. Now, on that, the Gemara asks a kasha, a problem. The Gemara says there's a story involving Shimon Hatzadik. So let's see. The Gemara asks, is it really forbidden to Kohanim to wear their priestly garments outside of the Beis HaMikdash? There's a Braisa that says counter to that. Here's the Bryson. So it says like this: on the 25th of Tevet, it's known as the Day of Mount Gerizim, when making eulogies is forbidden. It was considered like a minor festival, the 25th of Tevet, which we just passed by 25th of Tevet about a week ago. Why was the 25th of Tevet? We're going to get back to our point about priestly garments in a little bit, but we're going to talk about a whole story in order to address that point. So why is the 25th of Tevet so special? Right, we began with this question. Because it is the day when the Kuthians, the Kutim, asked Alexander the Macedonian for permission to destroy the house of our God. And Alexander the Great gave permission to them, and he said, yeah, we're going to destroy the temple, the Beit HaMikdash. And when the Jews became aware of that plot, what did they do? They sent a delegation. They told Shimon Hatzadik, who was the leader of the Jewish people. He was the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. So what did he do? He put on his priestly garments. He wrapped himself in it, and he set out on a journey to meet Alexander the Great, accompanied by many of the important dignitaries within the Jewish people. They lit torches in their hands. They walked all night long. They approached from this side and these from this side, meaning they were sort of on a march to meet up in the middle. They marched until the light of dawn rose, and once the light of dawn rose, Alexander saw the Jewish delegation in the distance, and he asked his officers, who are these people? Who are these people coming to approach me? They answered, they said, he asked, so he asked his officers, and they say, these are the Jewish people who rebelled against you. So again, the Kuthians, they told Alexander the Great, look at these Jewish people. They didn't help you in your war against Persia. Not only that, the Kuthians said, they also pray at their temple, at their Beit HaMikdash, for your downfall. And by using lies like this, the Kuthians were able to convince Alexander the Great that the Jewish people were enemies to his empire, and therefore he granted them their request to destroy the Beit HaMikdash. So Alexander saw them, and he noticed Shimon Hatzadik. Right, you can imagine the great Emperor Alexander the Great seeing this Jewish sage in this regal clothing, the Kohanic garb, the vestments of the high priest. So Alexander saw the most powerful person in the world. He saw Shimon Hatzadik, and he got down off of his chariot, and he bowed down in front of Shimon Hatzadik. And everyone was shocked. They couldn't imagine their great leader, Alexander the Great, bowing down to a lowly Jew, a priest. Why would the emperor of the world bow down to a Jew? I'll say a side note, a story I heard a little bit a while ago. Apparently in diplomatic events and different things like that, and between world leaders, there's some sort of concept also of bowing down when you show as a sign of respect, that a world leader could bow down to another one, sort of out of respect. Wow, I recognize your accomplishments, very important. Again, maybe everyone's heard this story already, but I was very awed by it. Apparently, one of the staff members, either for Netanyahu or one of the Israeli politicians, one of the Israeli leaders, was a lady, a mother of 10 children, and she was one of the staff members on this politician's board of staff. And when they met Joe Biden, he was told, okay, there's a lady, she's not going to shake your hand. She's an Orthodox Jewish woman. Don't expect her to shake your hand. By the way, she has like 10 kids, So apparently Joe Biden, out of recognition for, the amazing accomplishment, the amazing feat of raising so many children, he actually bowed and showed this honor for this Orthodox Jewish woman, just for her efforts as a mother, recognizing, wow, this is really a very important thing. Maybe some people have heard this story before, but it brought to mind this concept. So Alexander the Great bowed down to Shimon Hatzadik, the high priest, the leader of the Jewish people. And all of Alexander's subjects were floored. How would it be? So they said to Alexander, should a king such as yourself bow down before the Jew? How would that be? So he replied something very amazing. He said, an image in the likeness of this man wins victory before me at my battlefield. Meaning to say, whenever I go to battle, I see an image of Shimon Hatzadik in front of me, and it's that image that I see before I win a battle. Meaning to say, Alexander attributed his incredible military successes to the merit of this Shimon Hatzadik. So Alexander then turned to this Jewish delegation and he said, why have you come? Why are you here? Now remember, Alexander the Great is about to destroy the Beis HaMikdash based on the advice of the Kuthians. So he asked them, why are you here? What are you coming for? So they replied, we came regarding the house, Beis HaMikdash, in which we pray for you and for your empire that it should not be destroyed. And they asked, is it really true that the Kuthians misled you, Alexander, into destroying it and you gave them permission? Is that really something that you would do? Meaning, we pray for your success in the temple, and the reason why you see the image of Shimon Hatzadik going before you, before every battle that you're successful, is because in the Beis HaMikdash, that's where you're davened for, you're prayed for. So why would you go and destroy that house of worship? You're basically shooting yourself in the foot. So what happened? He said to them, who are the ones that misled me? And they said, the Jewish people said back to him, he said, the Kuthians who stand before you. So Alexander said back to the Jews, behold, they are delivered into your hands. Do with them as you see fit. So what they do? So it says, the Jewish people, they pierced their heels, suspended them from the tails of their horses. They dragged them over thorns and thistles until they reached Mount Gerizim, the site of the Kuthian temple. And at that Kuthian temple, they proceeded to destroy that temple. And they planted grass and other things. Exactly what the Kuthians were planning to do to the Beit HaMikdash, to the Jewish temple. So we see what just happened was the Kuthians planned to have Alexander the Great destroy the temple, to destroy the Beis HaMikdash through their slandering the Jews. And what ended up happening, since Alexander recognized the holy image of Shimon Hatzadik, Shimon the saint, that Alexander granted the Jews their request, and instead of the Kuthians destroying the temple in Jerusalem, the Jewish people were able to turn it around on them. They destroyed their temple on Mount Gerizim, and instead planted a vetch garden, it says. So we see an amazing thing. Hashem really turned our enemies' plans around on their head. So in deference to this incredible miracle that happened, whereby Alexander the Great was convinced to protect the Jewish people and turn on our enemies, the sages enacted a festival, very minor festival, on the 25th day of Shvat, right? We just passed that like a few days ago, about a week ago. A day that would be forbidden in eulogies and fasting. And we have that day, that 25th of Shvat. Sorry, the 25th of Tevet, I misspoke. 25th of Tevet. Now, just to finish off the Gemara, because it is a little bit interesting, we began this discussion with a question. We said that it's forbidden for a priest to wear their priestly garments outside of the temple. And parenthetically in this story, again, it wasn't the main part of the story, but parenthetically we see that Shimon Hatzadik was wearing his priestly garments outside of the temple when he went to go greet Alexander the Great. So that's the question that the Talmud is trying to bring out from this discussion. So we're going to leave that discussion. It is interesting. If anyone wants to know how the Gemara finishes, we could talk about it, but that's not really our discussion right now. We're going to discuss now Shimon Hatzadik and Alexander the Great. Now, one of the questions that I had, which maybe everyone else also has, is it's true that Alexander the Great saw Shimon Hatzadik before he had any military victory. And based on that, it would seem that the Jewish people were really praying for Alexander the Great to succeed. The question is why? Why did they have a desire? Why would the Jewish people care sort of about which king sat on the throne? Persian Empire, Greek Empire, does it really make such a difference to us? Do we see somewhere that the Jewish people had some sort of prior knowledge that the Greek Empire would treat the Jews better, more freely? It's not so clear from the story. I'm leaving this as a sort of a place for more Ian, meaning a tzarich Ian, we say in learning. This needs a little more clarification. I don't really have clarity on this issue at the moment. I'm very curious about it. So if anyone does any looking into it and sees some more about this story in the Talmud, I'd be very curious. But in any case, Alexander accepted that the Jewish people were really on his side, and therefore he gave the Kuthians into our hand, and instead of the temple being destroyed, we were able to destroy their temple. So that is the story I wanted to discuss. Now, another important point we have to discuss is the differing worldviews between Alexander the Great and, of course, Shimon Hatzadik. The philosophical svarim, machshava svarim, the books of sort of Jewish thought, modern Jewish thought that we have nowadays, like in the Hasidic svarim and different svarim like that, they discuss this great meeting between Alexander the Great and Shimon Hatzadik. Now remember, this is only a few generations before the story of Hanukkah. We're talking about the beginnings of the Greek Empire. It's only a few generations before the story of Hanukkah. And already we see, even in sort of the beginnings of the Greek Empire, almost a humbling of Greek culture as represented by Alexander the Great, Hellenism, the sort of ideal of equality, world peace, sort of making the world into the sort of the melting pot that Western culture sort of tries to make it. And that coming into confrontation with Jewish culture and its values that we don't necessarily give prime importance to art, the intellectual, philosophical culture. We have a focus on Torah and mitzvahs and fulfilling our cosmic purpose. Whereas Greek culture has a focus on the physical world, beauty, philosophy, art, the sciences, perfecting our physical world, making it a more pleasing world to live in. Judaism's main goal is reflected in the spirit, in perfecting the internal spirit, our connection to God, our connection to the Torah and its ethical and moral imperatives. Now, these two things clashed, the great clash between Hellenism and Jewish culture. Now, interestingly enough, Shimon Hatzadik was able, in his way, to humble Greek culture, to bring down Greek culture that the emperor was kneeling in front of him without even having to lift a finger. There's a pasuk, it says in English, it says, not by strength, not by might, but by spirit alone. That's the Jewish spirit, that's the way we win our battles. In contrast, the next meeting between Hellenism and Judaism during Hanukkah was not as peaceful. In fact, it was very violent. The Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, had to go to war, physical war, against the Greek culture, against the Greek Hellenism that was trying to rob them of their religion, trying to keep them from keeping Shabbat and observing Brit Milah and all of these, on all of the mitzvahs that we have. So what was the difference between Shimon Hatzadik, that he was able to confront Hellenism without having to lift a finger physically, and later in the day when the Hashmonaim, where they had to go wage a physical war? So the answer that I saw brought down was very interesting. I saw it brought down from Rabbi Aaron David Goldberg, who was a Rosh Yeshiva in Cleveland. And he says a very interesting thing. He says that Shimon Hatzadik was on such a high level of Torah. He was so immersed in the Torah that his merit was so strong that when it came to a confrontation with Hellenism, there was no confrontation. It was completely subjected to him, since he was so connected to Torah and so immersed in holiness. The Hashmonaim, the Hasmonean dynasty, the Maccabees, already was many years later. And it's true they were devoted to Torah, but they were not on the level of Shimon Hatzadik of many years earlier. And therefore, they couldn't suffice it to wage a battle of the spirit, which they also did. They actually had to go to a physical war to show their devotion through physical self-sacrifice. So that's one of the lessons of this story with Alexander the Great and Shimon Hatzadik. A few of the other things I want to bring out too. Again, we discussed already our value of the spiritual over the physical. One of the other important lessons, of course, is that the intellectual fads that we see sort of, every few decades, sort of what's in terms of which value system, liberalism, communism, socialism, capital, all these different isms that always are sort of recycling in our Western world. None of them are permanent. Some of them might be good ideas and have good in them, but at the end of the day, they have no permanence to them because they're not based on a divine mission, and they're not based on divine values, and therefore they're not based on divine guidance. So try to be able to see beyond when people confront you with foreign, non-Jewish values, see beyond it and say, is this value something that's eternal, or is this something that sort of, according to my place in history and society, seems like a good thing? Another thing I wanted to speak about also is how do we relate to a non-Jewish leader? Now, this is getting maybe a little bit political. Our current president, Donald Trump, obviously has done some things that seem to be good for the Jewish people, maybe also some things that aren't. I'm not sure. But he's someone that would seem, at least on the surface level, to be a friend of the Jews. So what's our proper attitude when relating to such a person? Are we supposed to sort of flatter him, sort of humble ourselves to this person? What's the correct attitude? So I think we see the lesson from Shimon Hatzadik. There was no groveling, no flattery, no empty flattery involved in this interaction. Shimon Hatzadik acted with complete dignity and allowed Alexander to humble himself before Shimon Hatzadik. Now, I don't know if Trump is going to humble himself before anybody, to be honest. It doesn't seem like his type. But we can get a very important lesson that it's not our job to go and give empty words of flattery to a world leader. We lead the Jewish people in our way. We lead through our spirit, through our moral and ethical guidance that we offer for the world. So we should never feel like, oh, we need to go and flatter this world leader in order to gain favor. So those are some of the lessons. There are definitely more that we can learn from this interaction between Shimon Hatzadik and Alexander the Great. There are many more, and I think it's a very interesting topic. If anyone wants to explore more, it's on page 69a in Tractate Yuma. And there's also more interesting discussions between Alexander the Great and the Jewish sages of the Negev in Tractate Talmud. If anyone wants to know where that is, I can find that also, where Alexander the Great asks a series of philosophical questions to the sages of the Negev, the Jewish sages of the Negev. So that's also a series of 10 questions also recorded in the Talmud. So hopefully we explained a little bit why we have gratitude to Alexander the Great. We have a day marking the divine salvation that we had on the 25th of Tevet. And we also know perhaps why the Jewish people have a custom to actually name children after Alexander the Great. In fact, it says the year that this happened, in the ensuing year, all Jewish boys were named Alexander. So hopefully this gives everyone a little bit of insight into one of the great military emperors of world history, as well as how a Jewish leader is supposed to interact with the leaders of the nations.